Okay. Peace, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Shakara Tyler Saba, and I am the co-executive director of the Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network. And I'm going to be sharing about our work about building Black food sovereignty in Detroit. And I'm going to share my screen in a moment. I'm glad everyone is trickling in. Okay, I hope you can see what I see, and I hope you can hear me okay. So I'm going to be sharing about building Black food sovereignty in Detroit, and I'm excited that the AAG Detroit annual meeting next year will be in Detroit. So excited to meet everyone here. And so I want to start by sharing a little bit about myself before I dig into our work. So I consider myself to play multiple roles. I'm a returning generation farmer. I am an educator and organizer, a mother, as you can see here, which is really important to me. I got my PhD from Michigan State University in the Department of Community Sustainability. And I basically studied Black agrarianism and the pedagogical processes involved in the resurgence of our Black agrarian identities and cultures throughout the African diaspora. And I use Detroit in various case studies. And I consider myself to be a feminist. I do abolition, or I do food sovereignty and in climate justice and environmental justice work as commitments of decolonization and abolition. And I do want to uplift the quote from Mary Hooks. She is with the Black Lives Matter Atlanta chapter, and she says the mandate for Black people in this time is to avenge the suffering of our ancestors and to earn the respect of future generations and to be willing to be transformed in the service of the work. And I hold this statement very dear to my spirit because this is the overall reason why I do this work. This is mainly spiritual. This is a very deeply spiritual process for me and people that I'm in community with. And so we always pay homage to those that got us here, that got us here, and then always honoring those that will be coming in the future. So I want to start with a participatory exercise. So I'm going to go to a Menti. Oops, it's tricky. Okay. I want to go to a Menti, and please let me know. I can't really see the chat, but let me know if you can see this. Please scan the QR code or put the code in menti.com. Sorry. Screen. Okay. So hopefully folks can either scan with your phone or type in menti.com in your browser and put in 349800042. Okay, I see folks are already in there. Thank you for your response. So what is Blackness to you? Because we often talk about Blackness in abstract forms or highly theoretical forms or even extremely practical forms. So, but what is Blackness? Because when we talk about Black food sovereignty, we can't divorce Blackness from this process. So I just want to take a quick temperature check for those that are in the space. And there's no one right answer. What is Blackness? Thank you. Empowerment, racialized, minoritization, collectivism, power, community, identity, solidarity, people of African descent, collectivism, livingness, praxis, unknown. I feel that. Yes, it is very unknown. Resistance, strength, the universe. And then if you know how word clouds work, the bigger words are the more frequent or common words that folks are inserting. So it's an interesting analysis that we have together. All right, Blackness is beautiful. Blackness is open-ended and radical. A few more seconds. Okay. All right. So I would agree. Thank you for indulging me. Thank you for participating. I would agree with this very basic general assessment of Blackness. For me, Blackness is often it's too much of a focus on struggle and oppression, which is a reality, which we're going to dig into throughout the presentation. And Black food sovereignty work as it relates to reviving our land and food cultures is a celebration. So for me, Blackness is ceremony, it's joy, it's love, and above all else, it's like a spiritual celebration. And I'm going to share more concretely what that means in a moment. Okay. So we can't talk about Black food sovereignty without talking about the current conditions that we're currently immersed in. So we live in a white supremacist society, or the myth of white supremacy, or even white hegemony, which most people prefer over white supremacy. But this is a colonial strategy, right, that has created this social construct of race and racism that basically suggests or demands that white people are superior to everyone else, to people of color, right? Um, and so this myth of white supremacy is of course a myth, as is stated, and it assumes that there is all the power that is held within society is held by white people. And we know that white supremacy is in direct intersection or in direct relationship with other systems of oppression, such as heteropatriarchy, that puts men and heterosexual people at the top of the hierarchy, and also racial capitalism, which suggests that people with more economic standing that happen to be not coincidentally white people have more power and privilege in society, right? So racial capitalism, white supremacy, and heteropatriarchy work very well together, right? Like these systems of oppression are the undergirding foundation to imperialism and colonialism as very rampant, widespread systems that work well together. And at the excuse me, at the foundation of colonialism is stolen land and stolen labor. So the formula that we often say, white land equals black plus black labor equals red land plus black labor equals white gold, right? So that's the settler colonial formula for how empire was built. From chattel enslavement to manifest destiny to the genocide of indigenous peoples, then genocide of African peoples, and enslaving indigenous and black peoples on what became empire land is how the system came to be, right? So we live in a plantation economy where these systems work very well together. And so we have to address the systems as a collective of systems and not just in silos, right? And so we have to be addressing white supremacy, racial capitalism, heteropatriarchy all at once and not individually. And so this is what Black food sovereignty is about. So before we dig into the nitty gritty of that, I wanted to take a brief moment, and we're going to do a crash course in Black land dispossession and displacement. So in 1862, the Homestead Act was passed down or was implemented at the federal level as a way to basically disseminate stolen indigenous people's lands to white settlers. And from 1862 to 1866, all Homestead Acts disseminated millions of acres of land that was stolen by indigenous peoples and given to white settlers over those decades. In 1865, what people would consider 40 acres and a mule, or special field order 15, was the the policy that was supposed to grant newly freed African peoples that were enslaved for centuries, 40 acres and a mule. And of course, we know that was redacted by the oligarchy, that was redacted by the federal government because Black people never got their 40 acres and a mule. The Freedmen's Bureau was set up that same year as the governing body to disseminate Black people receiving land after the Civil War. And from 1889 to 1940, there were many examples, many case studies of the white destruction of all Black towns. Tulsa, Oklahoma, for one, Greenwood, North Carolina, for as another example. I mean, there's many vast histories of how thriving Black towns that were self-sufficient, self-reliant, economically, politically, socially, culturally, were burned to ashes because of the white supremacists or white terrorists that didn't agree with Black people being sovereign. And so today, that should say 2024 actually. So Black farmers own less than 1 million acres. They farm 4.5 million acres of land on a national level and own less than 1% of all US farms. So what is the food system today? What does that look like? Stolen land is at the foundation, right? There are large scale operations that are undergirded by big ag subsidies, fossil fuel based inputs, air and water pollution, soil fertility is on the decline, carbon dioxide or overall carbon loss, water retention is on the decline, microbial biodiversity is on the decline, nutrient density of food is declining, harvest farm yields are declining, depending on what sources you use. Pesticide residues are on the rise. Dietary chemicals are a huge problem. Enslavement has not ended. The majority of our food is grown and harvested and processed by farm workers and factory workers. And this is a system of exploitation of how the food system is run today, not just here on Turtle Island, but also just throughout the world on a global level. There has been rampant erasure of indigenous peoples' cultures, again, not just here on Turtle Island, but on a global level. And there have been an escalation in consumer illnesses. And of course, the profit to farmer ag corporation ratio is unbalanced. So what exactly is food sovereignty, food justice, and food sovereignty? Like, what is the relationship, right? So food security, and this is just a brief crash course that we can get into questions and answers later. Please put your your questions in the Q&A box. Food security is a charity model, right? Arguably, because food security is about making sure that no one is hungry at the very basic level. Food justice takes it a bit further and says, okay, well, what about the quality of the food? What about the price of the food, the accessibility overall of the food, and the justice dimensions as it relates to how people eat, and also how people may want their food grown. And then food sovereignty takes it a bit further than that and gets to power and ownership and the owning the means of production as a way to build power in society. And so Raj Patel, who's a good friend of mine and a very dear comrade in food sovereignty movements on a global level, says that you can have food security in prison. And obviously prisons they don't represent the society that we need and want. Especially within an abolitionist framework, like carcerality is one of the root causes of the oppressive systems that we are deeply entrenched in. And so if we're going to obliterate prisons, we don't want to just stay at a place where there's food security, where food banks and food pantries are held as the prioritized solutions to building a better food system. Food sovereignty is about people having the power to define their own food system and having the means of controlling their own food system. So the seed supply, the water supply, the inputs, compost, like how sovereign or how much power do we have in owning these systems that dictate the overall food system? And so we know that building Black food sovereignty is not a new thing. We look to our ancestral movements, such as the Black Panther Party for Black liberation. For example, they had various people-centered programs that focused on mutual aid and feeding people. The free breakfast program fed thousands of children a day on a national level. And this, this was located in cities such as Oakland, Philadelphia, Chicago, Detroit. Many chapters around the country worked together to make sure that Black children didn't go to school hungry, because they knew that you could not recruit hungry children onto the Black liberation battlefield. And so as a means to ensuring that Black children and overall Black families got what they needed, they provided mutual aid programs in the methods or through ways of food and land as a way to make sure that we were good, right? We weren't just surviving, but thriving. And Fannie Lou Hamer's Freedom Farm Cooperative is another example, where Freedom Farm had a pig bank, and each family received a baby pig that they took care of. And then when that pig got pregnant, they would return a pig to the overall pig bank. And this was a farm cooperative, right? So the idea around working together instead of competing is not new. This is very intrinsic to Black liberation movements, Black communities living and thriving together. Like pooling our resources together so that we can beat the system at its own game has been a key strategy in Black liberation. And so Black cooperative farm development is a key aspect of Black food sovereignty movements, as we have seen historically. So we know that food and justice and sovereignty intersects with other systems of oppression and liberation. And this comes from Dara Cooper's Black Feminist Freedom Dreams, with some minor edits from myself. And this slide was also created by Kisa, who is a dear comrade of mine here in Michigan in the movement. And so we know that food justice and food sovereignty is deeply intersecting with reproductive justice, education justice, the movement to dismantle police violence, incarcerality, the conservation justice movement, housing justice, dismantling the prison industrial complex, environment and climate justice overall, labor justice, and health justice. So there is no sector of life that food justice and food sovereignty does not touch. And so for this reason, we don't operate in a silo. We're deeply in relationship and in deep praxis with other justice movements here at the local level in Detroit, but also on state and federal levels. So now I'm going to dig more into our work specifically here in Detroit. And we say that we are building Black self-determination as a way to build Black food sovereignty. The founding ED, Malika Keeney of the Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network, says that food is the cover story. Black liberation is the real deal, right? And so food is a method for us to liberate ourselves. It doesn't just start and end with food. So this is a very brief assessment or a map of sorts of the racialized dynamics here in Detroit. So the white part or the blue part is the suburb, and those are where a majority of the white people live. The green represents the Black population, which is internal to the city boundaries. The red in the center here represents a very strong Arab population that's concentrated in the central part of the city, Hamtramck and Dearborn, which are like municipalities of Detroit. And the orange here is Southwest Detroit, which has a strong Latinx population. But as you can see, Detroit is highly segregated, and it is also a majority Black city, and it's extremely low income. So if you see here, according to this map, the red parts represent less than $30,000 a year, right, per capita income, and majority of the red is concentrated here in the Detroit area in Southeast Michigan. We also see that hazardous facilities and land use waste facilities are concentrated in the Detroit area, being that the number 5 here has the highest concentration of these facilities. And it's not a coincidence that they're located where a majority of the low income people are located in Detroit, which also means the majority of Black people. So we see here that Detroit is the blackest city in the country, and no shade to other Black cities, right? Like what we mean is Detroit has more Black people than other people living here. And of course, other areas like Atlanta and maybe Houston and other Black cities have more Black people than Detroit, but that's because they have more people. So Detroit is the blackest city in the country because it has more Black people compared to everyone else, all other populations in the city. And Detroit is an extremely large area. Comparing Detroit to 3 other major cities, you can see that San Francisco, Boston, and Manhattan can fit within the parameters of the city of Detroit. And the city of Detroit is a very unique metropolitan area because we have an enormous amount of vacant land available. There's a total area of 139 square miles. Roughly 1/3 or 40 square miles of that is vacant. And that's really unique for a major city. And we can get into the histories of that, the collapse of the auto industry and the extreme divestment of the city, the bankruptcy that hit in 2014. I mean, there's many, many reasons why the exodus of the city has created this enormous vacancy. And I wanted to, hold on, sorry. So before I get into the work of the Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network, I wanted to pause and see if there are any questions about the overall histories of food sovereignty and Blackness and the general landscape of Detroit before I dig into our work. Okay. Great. Yes, I'll share the PowerPoint slides, of course. All right, so I'm gonna share a video as an entry to the work of the Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network.
This project is about growing food, but this project is much more than just food. This is about growing community. It's about growing humanity. It's about growing ourselves. So we are reattaching ourselves to ourselves in this work because we've been dismembered mentally, spiritually, physically. All too often, our first introduction to our relationship to agriculture is always from a lens of oppression. It's either our enslavement or sharecropping or tenant farming. Although our ancestors were enslaved, which is a condition, our ancestors were not slaves, which denotes an identity. When Europeans came to Africa, they didn't come to Africa stealing slaves. They came to Africa and they stole African men, women, and children. And our children learned that one of the reasons was not because we were ignorant, but because of our brilliance of agriculture. The work of our ancestors is work that we have been charged to continue. Growing food is only one aspect of that. Understanding that We are an integral part of nature, the natural world, that all of this, our ancestors understood, that all of this was sacred. This work becomes healing spaces for us. And as we heal others.
Okay, I hope you all enjoyed that video. So the Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network, we recently changed our name from Security to Sovereignty 2 years ago. And we started in 2006 as a way for us to ensure that the food justice and food sovereignty movement in Detroit was led by those most impacted by the problems. And so we know that gentrification that produces a lot of white, well-intentioned people coming into the city, taking up a lot of space, was a really big issue. And so DBCFSN was founded to make sure that Black people are in leadership of the solutions developed to address the problems around food and land injustices. And so we got started in 2006, but the organization grew out of the early work of Ensortiment Institute that was founded in 1988. And the Ensortiment Institute is an African-centered charter school that Baba Malik Yakini founded to ensure that his children and the other Black children in the city had a safe, spiritually grounded learning space that inevitably incorporated food systems into the curriculum. And so the development of a food security curriculum in the classrooms made sure that weekly lessons in the garden and in the kitchen was the foundation of their learning as a K through 12 or a K through 8th grade school. And so the Shamba Organic Garden Collective was created as a way to spearhead or steward families starting gardens at home, because many children would get really excited about the food that they were bringing home from school. And so many parents and other people in the household wanted gardens at their home. And so the Shamba Groundbreakers was a group of people that rotated the city to provide the like back-breaking work to start the gardens at people's homes. So it was ripping out bushes and grass, broad forking the soil, loading in tons of compost to amend the fertility and the quality of the soil so that people could have thriving, healthy home gardens. So this was the foundation of the Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network. And I already shared a little bit about food security versus food sovereignty, so I'm going to skip that piece. But this is a picture of our co-founding executive director, Malika Kini, and Raj Patel, who's a global food sovereignty activist. So food sovereignty was coined by the Declaration of Nyalini, or basically the declaration was a project of La Via Campesina. And it was shared at the first Global Forum on Food Sovereignty in 2007. And they defined food sovereignty as the right of peoples to healthy and culturally appropriate food produced through ecologically sound and sustainable methods, and their right to define their own food and ag systems. And it puts the aspirations and needs of those who produce, distribute, and consume food at the heart of food systems and policies, rather than the demands of markets and corporations. So DBCFSN operates a 7-acre farm called D-Town Farm. We have a solar power station. We have a rainwater retention pond that holds over 50,000 gallons of rainwater that we use to irrigate the crops on the farm. And we have about almost 3 acres of the 7 acres in food production. We welcome volunteers every Saturday and Sunday, 8 to 12. And we've recently changed the name from volunteers to self-liberators, because we see people as joining in the work to liberate ourselves and in our communities by growing food. And so it's not like a traditional volunteer process where you're just giving your labor, but you're actively creating a better world by producing food and then making sure that it's sold and processed equitably and more justly. We grow over 30 different varieties of fruits and vegetables. We focus on culturally relevant crops such as callaloo and okra, watermelon, collard greens, because we farm to feed our people and not to make money, or not because it's sexy. And so we farm what our people want to eat and what is in high demand. We also have 2 youth development programs. One is the Food Warriors program that operates in 2 schools currently. And we focus on gardening with the children and then producing recipes and working with them to make sure that they know what to do with eggplant, and they know how to produce bok, or how to prepare bok choy. So we grow the food and then we prepare the food in healthy ways so that they can expand their palate. And also we have the food and flavor program as a way to steward food entrepreneurship with teens in the city. And so they may grow herbs and then dry them out and then make teas that they sell at farmers markets and community events in the city. And so this is a way for teens who are often concerned about making money, right? Like they can see that they can actually make money in the food sovereignty movement by growing food, processing it, developing a business plan, and supporting the community at the same time. And I want to emphasize that our youth programs are not like the typical healthy cooking and gardening for children. It's overall a way for them to see, as Mama Hanifa mentioned in the video, our genius around agriculture, because oftentimes our youth are connecting our oppression through enslavement to the land through agriculture. And so we want to shift that paradigm by sending them the message that this can be profitable. This is a spiritual process that makes you feel good. You know, this is more than just backbreaking work and losing money, right? And so we're shifting that paradigm through our various youth programs. And we also we recently opened the Detroit Food Commons, which is a 31,000 square foot facility that has 2 floors. The first floor is occupied by the Detroit People's Food Co-op, which is a community-owned grocery store. You pay a $200 lifetime membership fee, and you become a member owner of the store, which gets you various benefits that we can get into during the Q&A. And on the second floor, DBCFSN's office suites, along with the Kuji Chakalia kitchens and the Mama Imani banquet hall, operate on the second floor. So the Kuji Chakalia kitchens, which means community self-determination in the Oguzo Saba, with the 7 principles of Kwanzaa, are 4 shared use commercial kitchens that are available to food entrepreneurs in the city to rent. Because many food entrepreneurs need a licensed facility to produce value-added products to sell in grocery stores, to sell to restaurants or other means. And so the commercial kitchens are a huge part of the food sovereignty work, because it addresses what to do with the food after it leaves the farm. And then we have the Mama Imani Humphrey Banquet Hall as our community gathering space, because food sovereignty is also about community, as Mama Hanifa also mentioned in the video. We also have the Congo Beehive Collective, which is led by our beekeepers at the farm. They have traveled to the Congo to teach people at the Congo how beekeeping, or how to build an apiary as a way to sustain the community economically, but also to support the ongoing conservation efforts in that part of the world. And we also founded the Detroit Black Farmer Land Fund, which is a coalition of 3 urban ag organizations in the city: Oakland Avenue Urban Farm, Keep Growing Detroit, and DBCFSN. And we are rebuilding Black intergenerational wealth through land ownership. So we basically support Black growers in the city with owning their land. We hold their hand while they go through the process to purchase their land from either a private seller or the Detroit Land Bank Authority as a more public seller. And we also support them with developing infrastructure on their land, whether it's rainwater catchment systems, tool sheds, raised beds. I mean, whatever they want, we basically pay for it. And we support them in their missions and visions. So to date, we have awarded 239 Black growers with land and infrastructure awards. 75 of those are current landowners, with about 18 acres of land purchased by awardees. And 53 of those awards are infrastructure projects, and 16 are currently in the process. So overall, food sovereignty is about shifting from the extractive economy and reinvesting in the regenerative economy. So this requires a shift in economic control to communities, democratizing wealth in the workplace, advancing ecological restoration, being guided by racial justice and social equity, relocalizing production and consumption, and retaining and restoring cultures and traditions. And this is part of the just transition, which the Climate Justice Alliance has coined as a like stop the bad and build the new paradigm. If we are going to get to a better place where the planet is not just a place for people with power and privilege to thrive, but a place where everyone can thrive, we have to reside in a more regenerative economy mindset, where caring and sacredness is at the heart of what we do instead of consumerism and colonialism, right? Like we have to be cooperating and not competing and not exploiting. We want to forefront ecological and social well-being instead of the enclosure of wealth and power and the extraction of dig, burn, and dump. And our governance has to be grounded in the grassroots, deep democratic process where people are in control and not a governance process that's grounded on militarism. And so this overall captures the movement that we're working towards. And there's an abundance of literature that talks about the history of Black food sovereignty, the history of Black farmers, the history of Black co-ops, and how these things intersect. We have an abundance of media and offerings that will provide a lot of information as you continue to study and skill up in preparation for the annual meeting in March. And I want to end with this really beautiful Mexican proverb. They tried to bury us, but they didn't know we were seeds. And we see this as a way of building towards radical imagination, because we know the systems that we're currently existing within weren't set up for us. And so we are learning how to completely dismantle the system and build a new one in its place, where we can not just survive, but thrive together as a community. And so I'm going to end there, and I'm really excited for a dialogue, and I hope you have some really rich questions. Okay, so I see some questions in the chat. What does Shamba mean? Okay. So Shamba is a key Swahili word, and I actually forgot the meaning, honestly. I can look it up briefly. But here in Detroit, we talk about practicing our culture as liberation. And we often use Swahili terms as a way to resist like colonial language of English or even Spanish and French, like these colonial languages that really get into our psychology. And so we practice our culture by speaking African indigenous languages. And Shamba means a piece of ground under cultivation, according to a certain source. Hope that was helpful. How have migrations from the South played into Detroit's population? Yeah, that's a really great question. We often call Detroit an up south city because it is an amalgamation of many people from deep south cities such as Memphis and Atlanta and Houston and Charlotte. Um, and we often say that Detroit represents an up south agrarian culture because we know that many people that migrated here um, brought their agrarian traditions with them. And they brought actual seeds and recipes and like other tools from the land from the South with them here to the North, because it was a way to carry their heritage and their legacy with them in this new place. And Detroit more explicitly reverberates Southern agrarian culture, um, more broadly, like in the music and the fashion of the city. Detroit represents this like really unapologetic self-determination where people are, what I would like to say, um, alchemizing our power, like producing something very little into something very abundant just by sharing stories together, working together on land, um, and really figuring out how to make a better system or a better world by not relying on like local politicians, for example, like not putting all of the marbles in the bucket around that, like how the system can change, but how we can change the system itself. I hope that was a helpful response. And there are like many resources, such as like Monica White's Freedom Farmers book that talks about the connection between Detroit and several southern cities, historically and contemporarily. I can put that link in the chat if it's helpful. With 1/3 of the urban space in Detroit actively working to support the creation of farms. Is the Detroit municipality actively working to support the creation of farms? So the Detroit Land Bank Authority has gotten better. The Detroit Black Farmer Land Fund has worked to keep the Land Bank Authority more accountable to the people of the city. It hasn't been an easy process, and as you can imagine, any public municipality that has the overall goal of keeping power and wealth concentrated in the hands of the white and the wealthy, um, it's not going to be very amicable to us as like a radical organization that's working to shift power and wealth in the form of land in the city. So we've had some bumping of heads with them, and at the same time they have shifted very minimally um to more equitable processes around like land access and redistribution in the city. It's not ultimately where we want it to be, but we're on that slow journey of teaching them what equity and justice looks like in practice. um I'm looking at the second question. Does the Detroit municipality provide monetary help to support and sort of a DBCFSN Town Farm or other Black farmers and farms across Detroit? Compared to what it should be or what it could be, Detroit as a municipality is not at all providing monetary support to D-Town Farm. We actually have a license agreement with the city. It's a 20-year license agreement that's a renewal of our 10-year license agreement. And they don't charge us to use the land, but they also don't pay us to use the land. Um, we are engaged in a number of local policy advocacy efforts to make the city more accountable to the food sovereignty movement here on the ground in Detroit. So what that looks like is hiring people to do like not lobby, but to go to city council and to make sure that they know what the needs and wants are of urban farmers on the ground. And we're also pounding the pavement throughout neighborhoods to make sure that residents know that they could let their voices heard to the local political body so that they can show up to city council meetings and testify on the benefits of urban ag and the importance of food sovereignty at the city level. But of course, the city, we have some champions and we don't have champions in other respects. But a major win that I want to uplift is Tafira Rushdan, who's the sustainability director of the city, also the lead founder, co-founder of the Detroit Black Farmer Land Fund. She used to work for Keep Growing Detroit, another major urban ag organization in the city. She now works at the city level and is bringing that grassroots spirit to the city level and helping us to hold the city accountable to food sovereignty, which is a major win. And then we also have Patrice Brown, who works with the Detroit Black Farmer Land Fund as well, who's the director of urban ag at the city. So we have various people on the inside, as we say, to help us push our agenda at the city level, which is making a huge difference. Okay, I'm gonna go to the Q&A box. I own some property that I want to turn into a community hub and farm. Are there resources or programs that help walk through the process? Yes, the Detroit Black Farmer Land Fund is one explicit program that can support you if you are a Black grower, of course. And Keep Growing Detroit's Garden Resource Program is another great resource for farmers that are learning what to do and how to do it. And you just want to be in community with other urban growers who are figuring out the same thing. So I would suggest you look up the Keep Growing Detroit's Garden Resource Program and the Detroit Black Farmer Land Fund. Jelani asks, how do the Zapatista and Kurdish movements inspire your work? Oh, yeah, that's a really beautiful question. I'm not as familiar with Kurdish movements. So please type in the chat or share audibly if you choose to school me on that. But the Zapatista movements are a huge inspiration. First, because it's women led. And as a feminist, I know that women and femme more broadly are running the world, are leading the transformation of the world. Whenever I look around me and I see other people that are doing the work, I see women in particular. I mean, for me, as a Black woman and co-leading a Black organization, I see an abundance of Black women at the helm, leading the charge and doing it very unapologetically and sacrificially. And so I think that's a really big parallel between the Zapatistas and our movements here. And also the Zapatistas are really unapologetically anti-government. And I would have to say that although we work with the government in certain respects when we have to, um, the movement, the general sentiment of the movement here is very anti-government too, because the government is not in business to support the people. The government as a governing structure has ultimately been created to control people and resources and to limit accessibility, right? And so we are working to dismantle these very atrocious governmental structures that don't believe in the power of the people and the authentic grassroots governance of stewarding society that the people deeply need. I'll end there, but I have a lot more to say, but I want to get to the other questions. Are you involved in any canning projects for the fruits and vegetables grown in D-Town Farm? So in the past, we've done some minor canning and other food preservation, just like at the local residential level. Like some of the staff will take some tomatoes home, or some staff will take some garlic home and make medicines out of them and can them and things. But we are in the process of preparing the Kuji Chakalia kitchens to serve as a primary education space for these kinds of things, like food preservation more holistically, canning included. Because the commercial kitchen as a container is what's needed to do that safely. So we're in the process of getting our licensing and fundraising to begin a community-led incubator program for food businesses to work on canning, for entrepreneurial endeavors, but also for like mutual aid, community giveaways, and things like that. What is the ownership structure of the land places you described? Are they protected from investor acquisitions? Yeah, so I'm going to go into a brief history of how the Detroit Black Farmer Land Fund was started. So, Tafira Rushdan, who I mentioned previously, as a grower in the city and also like a really badass organizer, was seeing how many growers were constantly being displaced. And so when growers put carrots and kale and even fruit bushes in the ground, and then the city would just come and bulldoze it because a white wealthy investor bought it to build a condo or to build some other kind of lucrative facility that didn't bring money into the city, but only put money in their pockets as investors, right? And so this kept happening time after time after time. And Tafira kept asking herself the question, how can we create greater land security for people that are on the land so that investors don't don't just come and bulldoze the beautiful farm and community center space that was created. And so the Black Farmer Land Fund was born out of that very explicit need. And so we believe that land ownership does provide greater security that's needed for growers on the ground. While it doesn't protect growers all the time from things like eminent domain, where the city can basically say, yep, you own your land, but that's okay. We'll give you a check and we're still going to take it from you, as a very loose translation. That's still happening, and we're still finding ways to resist that. But overall, the growers in the city that are using their land for food sovereignty purposes, some own it and some don't, but we're pushing for more people to own it so that they can have greater security. Why did y'all change your name from security to sovereignty? So as I mentioned before, security is a very surface level orientation to justice. So this is what you see in like food charity pantries, food banks. Like it addresses accessibility on the very surface, but it doesn't get to the root problems or doesn't get to the root causes of the problem. So the reason why people are hungry is not because there's not enough food, right? Or even that they can't get it accessibility wise. Well, arguably that is a reason, but the overall reason is because they lack control over the means of production. We as a society have become a society of consumers and not producers. And so our relationship to capital that dictates our lives is very minimal compared to the corporations and the federal government that control, the flow of capital and all things that's related to it. And so security is a very surface level approach to justice because it just assumes that people just want to go to a food bank and get food, and then that's the end of the story, right? But food sovereignty is about power. It's about educating people and like reinvigorating people's identities and cultures as it relates to food and land, and inspiring them to have more control over their lives. And so if we can grow food, maybe we can make our own clothes, maybe we can build our own houses, right? So food sovereignty is a much more expansive paradigm that gets to power and self-determination, whereas security is a very like surface level approach to building justice. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have its place. It just doesn't take it as far as it needs to go. So I'm actually from Philadelphia. I don't live in DC, but I'm a part of the Black Dirt Farm Collective that's based in the DMV area, on the East Coast more broadly, but a lot of our members live in the DMV area. And so that's why you see that in my bio. And I love the Black Dirt Farm Collective dearly. Can white people who support racial justice contribute anything? to food sovereignty movements. Yes. So there's an abundance of things that white people can do. Please interrogate your power and privilege. Please think about how you can redistribute communal, personal wealth resources to Black, Indigenous, and other people of color communities. And also study up. So I presented a slide on various Black literature and other offerings around like our histories of food security, food justice and food sovereignty. And so doing your homework around these histories is really important so that you don't come into the conversation thinking that it's a blank slate, right? And thinking that you have all the solutions as a white person that doesn't share the experiences of people of color on the ground that are deeply impacted by these problems. So in some, please study, do your due diligence to study the histories of race and racism and white supremacy, study the histories of global indigenous models of food sovereignty, and then also come into these spaces with humility and being accountable to dismantling systems of whiteness that don't work for anyone, including yourself as a white person. I think we're coming up on time, so I'm going to take one more question, and please feel free to email me if I don't get to your question. Have you thought about a land trust model? Yes. So communal land ownership and land trust models are really critical to the work here in Detroit. The Cultivator Community Land Trust is the first land trust that is Black owned here in the city, that is really leading the way in what communal land ownership models look like here at the city level. And I'm happy to share Jerry Hebron's information with you all. I think she'll be at the conference in March, and she'll be presenting on a panel about communal land ownership models as a way to build power, rather than individual ownership models. So I'll be brief and say that there, and please feel free to visit DBCFSN's website where you can learn more about our work. And you can also visit our social media platforms to learn more about our work. And you can also donate through those platforms as well. And I'm going to type my email in the chat for those that have other questions or just want to connect beyond this webinar space. And thank you for having me.